Noah, I love the movies, love the TV stuff. I know you do as well. You're benching a couple things and watching a few shows. The Golden Globes were last night. Eddie Murphy got the Lifetime Achievement Award, the Cecil B. DeMille Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm sorry if I butchered that name, but did you see his three things of longevity and peace and the advice that he offered during that? No.
I did not see this. Now maybe it was locked in on the Sixers. Yeah.
Nah, I had a little dual screen action going on. But he, Eddie Murphy, he's been in the entertainment industry 46 years, 41 years in the movie business, and he said here are the three things that have helped him achieve longevity and peace in the business, and maybe some people out there can use it as well. So the first thing he said was, number one, pay your taxes. Number two was to mind your business. And the third thing was to make sure you keep Will Smith's wife's name out your mother mouth. And bro, it was hilarious. True comedian, true performer, true entertainer. Are you on board with those three things? Can you take that and apply it to your life?
I would think I'm capable of accomplishing those three things.
Ready to build career skills in 2023? I'm sure you are. We'll do so by applying to Wilmington University today and get started by January 9th. Learn more and apply at wilmu.edu. Upskill, reskill, or start fresh in 2023 with a degree or certificate from Wilmington University. Wilmu works for you. Apply today to start January 9th. Cooler than a polar bear's toenails, it is the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. Wilmu works. Danny Pommells and Noah Levick joining you. Ben Berry in the cut like some iodine. What's going on with these 76ers? They put up a $147 on the Detroit Pistons, undermanned, injured squad, so down two centers. So set it up properly that they were not at full strength by any means. But, hey, you just play who's on the schedule. The Sixers taking care of business. Some much more meaningful games are on the horizon. But last night was a fun celebration of sorts at the Wells Fargo Center as the Sixers scored the most points they've scored in 4 years almost. James Harden back with another triple-double, climbing up the list and proving his greatness. And some other storylines to get to. The NBA midseason media survey is out. We'll dive into that. But some observations from last night, Noah, a bit of a celebration and a fun at the Wells Fargo Center as one of those games where the starters sat the entire fourth quarter and they're just, enjoying seeing some of the backups get in there and catch wreck.
Definitely. Obviously Joel Embiid being out on the court again is a thumbs up for the Sixers. And
how can I forget that?
Yeah, no, it's one of those nights where they probably would have won even if he was not available. Such is the quality of this Detroit Pistons team without Bojan Bogdanovic and a bunch of other key pieces. But Embiid, 36 points in 24 minutes, I think tells you that he's not especially rusty. There were one or two plays where you notice maybe he wasn't at his peak form or totally feeling the rhythm of the game yet, but obviously that was not problematic. I thought it was funny on one. He turned the ball over when Detroit went to his zone. Alec Burks picked it off and started going the other way. And I think everyone was under the impression of, all right, maybe pull it out. Don't try to challenge Joel Embiid. But Embiid, quite decisively rejected.
Not in my house.
Yeah, the former teammate did not have much of a chance on that one. So, yeah, the Sixers checked all the boxes they wanted to in this one. And yet again, James Harden was quite close to a triple-double within a single half. And he also passed Kyle Lowry on the all-time assist list. Obviously, Lowry still active, but not averaging nearly as many assists as Harden, who had 15 in this one. And sure seems like he has a strong chance to end the year with a double-digit average there. Tobias Harris, perfect from the floor, I believe. And basically anything the Sixers wanted to accomplish, they did. honestly, for me, it felt like a varsity team versus the freshmen, I think I wrote, and just the ease of the ball movement and the obvious youth on the Detroit side that really meant they had zero chance to win this ball game. So yeah, very extended garbage time, and as we will get into, that meant a longer look at Jaden Springer, who did pretty well with that opportunity. I thought Embiid had a insightful comment that Springer's the kind of player who would be getting a lot of minutes if he was a Detroit Piston. But of course, the Sixers have a deeper team, and he's been mostly in the G League and bouncing back and forth a ton. But last night, played 9 minutes and did some nice things during that time on the floor.
Yeah, good to see Embiid back out there. I didn't mention back after 3 games with left foot soreness that he missed. The Sixers go 2-1 in those games. But for me, I'm looking at the game, and once again, James Harden showing his prowess, and he becomes the first Sixer since Mo Cheeks to have 15 or more assists for 5 or more games in a single season. He gets his 72nd triple-double, 6 behind Wilt Chamberlain for 6th all-time. Ridiculous that, I was just looking at the list after the last game. Russell Westbrook is at the top at 197 triple-doubles, which is just ridiculous to think about. But give him credit because he's the new standard bearer in an area where we thought the NBA might not really, come back to the Oscar Robertson triple-double for a season stuff, and he's changed that dramatically. But just seeing James out there being a level above, and that was encouraging for me because it's going to take both of them. It's the Detroit Pistons, but it's going to take both of them being virtuoso for the Sixers to be able to contend with these other teams in the Eastern Conference and maybe get a little bit more respect around the NBA because even though they're 25 wins on the season, they're not quite considered as elite as maybe some of the other teams in the league. But just a fun night at the Wells Fargo Center, and Embiid and Harden, a great 1-2 punch, and the complementary pieces as well. Any other observations from the starters that you noticed before we get to some of these backups?
Yeah, I just think this was the 7th time they've played together all season.
Right, out of 40 games. Excellent point.
Yeah. A small number. And I thought it was also interesting that Doc Rivers didn't make it sound as if this is the set in stone starting lineup for the remainder of the season. I think certainly D'Anthony Melton is still on his radar as obviously a starting caliber player and someone who tends to elevate his team defensively. So to me, that's an intriguing little storyline to follow here moving forward, whether 1, the Sixers can stay at full strength, and 2, whether certain matchups lead Rivers to move away from this lineup. But I think obviously heading into the season, they expected the 1-2-3 scoring punch with Maxey as that strong third guy, averaging over 20 a game, and they liked the idea of as Tucker, as the starting 4. But perhaps that does shift a little here moving forward. I think regardless, we see that Rivers is high on the idea of Maxey leading the second unit and doing so with Shake Milton as that secondary supplementary ball handler sort of guy. So they're all hoping that there are actually sustained opportunities to test these things out over a longer stretch. But regardless, last night, at least back in business in terms of having all the players available, being able to go to the preferred rotations, at least in the first half, and starting to work on, some of these combinations that will be important with the playoffs in mind.
Let's flesh that out a little bit because the common thought would be that Doc was really only referring to one other starting lineup that we've seen, and that would be like with the 3-guard rotation. But it seems like if you read between the lines, and 3 guards being Melton, Harden, and Maxey, but reading between the lines and based on what you just said, is there another lineup that he could be thinking of? Yeah, obviously matchup based, but he doesn't want to experiment too much. So is he thinking of going back to maybe Matisse being in the starting lineup, or Tucker and Maxey coming off the bench? What do you think he's really thinking of as his primary options there if it's not the 3 guards?
Yeah, they have a large coaching staff that does like discuss all this stuff. So I'm sure everything you mentioned has been on the table. I mean, as we talked about before, Matisse Thybulle as a starter in the second half of last season was good. I think based on the evidence this year and how Rivers has used them, that does not seem imminent. That will be on the table soon. I do think certainly Maxey as a sixth man and Melton as a starter, wouldn't be entirely out of the question in Rivers' mind. Not at all suggesting, that is happening next game or that Rivers is eager to use that. But
just some themes to think about over the next.
Just the way he framed it was like they really are confident in the lineup we saw yesterday offensively, and then obviously Melton, they consider him an elite defensive player. And clearly he's better on that end of the floor than Tyrese Maxey. But certainly, positionally, there's not a huge difference there. Whereas with Matisse Thybulle, you're looking at a longer wing defender, who might obviously be suited to guard, a star to start a game. So there are a bunch of combinations you can try, and I think that don't sound entirely outlandish. I think, of course, PJ Tucker coming off the bench and Melton starting is an attractive idea in some ways as well. But for now, I don't think we're going to be seeing, game after game, wild fluctuations with the lineup. But I do think it's notable, at least, that it's not just, okay, we're riding with these five guys for the rest of the season to start games.
I think the Sixers' lead was as much as 31 points last night as they.
41.
41? What was it, 41?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there you go, 41. Let me not take away any points from their magnificent total there and margin. But it's really like interesting to me that, you have these opportunities for these younger guys as the starters sit the bench. Jaden Springer, Paul Reed. We saw Furkan Korkmaz. Paul Reed gets the on-court walk-off interview. Jaden Springer gets some podium time. When's the last time Jaden Springer was at the podium? And he was up there. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it looked like he borrowed a jacket from the James Harden collection when he was up on the podium. But just a baby-faced young guy, and you mentioned he's been burning up the mileage up and down 95 between going to Delaware for Blue Coats games and coming up to play for the Sixers. But the fans enjoying seeing him out there on the court, the putback dunk, the layups, 4 for 4 from the floor, 10 points. A good transition point. Doc Rivers talked about his performance and how he made an impression in training camp after the game, and how, you could go to a man on the team and say how surprised they were about the way he showed up there. But just a good feel-good moment for the team to see, guys like that get on the floor and catch some wreck.
Definitely. To the podium point, he was approached by a Sixers public relations official of, hey, do you want to, go to the podium? And his response verbatim was, I don't even know where to go. So,
well, one of the Pistons players didn't even know where to go last night. I know you were there for that. I think it was Ivy, was it?
Yeah. Jaden Ivy, another young guy who was learning the ropes of the NBA. But yeah, Jaden Springer, I think, definitely did not mind being up there at the podium, and it was something I think everyone enjoyed, and everyone seems to really like his vibe, his personality, and just the consistent intensity he brings to the table in these practices. And this was a very rare game opportunity, his 8th time in an NBA game. Obviously, you don't want to extract anything dramatic in terms of the actual on-court play, but yeah, he showed some flashes. He's athletic, he's physically strong, has a bit of a nose for the ball, I think, on both ends. And of course, there are concerns related to the jump shot, related to the ability to just be a productive offensive player, etc. But at least last night, you saw a lot of the positives that led the Sixers to taking him 28th in the 2021 draft. And I think it wouldn't have been appropriate any other way for Springer to be playing in Portland, Maine tomorrow night. he will not get a chance at an encore. He's going to be with the Bluecoats against the Maine Celtics. So the Sixers are trying their best to get him game reps that are necessary. And they also like him up in the NBA so he can be exposed to some of these vets and learn some lessons and get the occasional chance to play in games. But for now, G League seems to be the focus with him, very understandably. He's 20 years old, and he does have a lot to work on offensively. But Doc Rivers called him someone who's going to be an elite defensive player. He didn't have to do that. He could have, in my mind, just said, this kid plays really hard, and we're excited about the development he's making. But Doc Rivers sure thinks that there's some real defensive potential in Jaden Springer. So we shall see over the next, several years if he fulfills that promise.
I don't know, man. Sometimes those words fall on deaf ears for me. I remember Brett Brown calling, various guys on the roster who weren't quite. Zaire Smith, I think he called the next Kawhi Leonard or compared him to Kawhi Leonard. And all due respect to Doc Rivers, I respect his opinion. The game you mentioned, it was like the JV versus the varsity with them playing Detroit. And that moment with, Reed and Furkan Korkmaz and those guys, specifically with Jaden Springer, because he doesn't play much, it reminds me, like, my son is a freshman on the varsity basketball team. And, when they're blowing the team out, he gets in the game and there's a new frenzy where, like, his friends in the stands are, like, cheering for him and he makes a play. Like, everybody gets excited or hits a bucket. And it's like a new, fresh, excitement in the arena or the gym or what have you. So I don't – and really NBA-wise, this is not a team that is – projecting toward the future. This is a team that is in win now mode. And I don't, spend a lot of energy on the garbage time or being intrigued by Jaden Springer or whatnot. There's been so many players that they've had in the pipeline and haven't properly developed and haven't quite made it, to the show, to the, starting lineup, regular rotation, and then, catch rec other places. We mentioned that. That's the third time I've used catch rec in this podcast, so I'm impressed with myself. But, so it is what it is. I just enjoy the moment. Like you said, Jaden Springer's back to the G League rotation and, on that beat. I won't spend a lot of my energy enjoying that last night because there's so many loftier, higher, goals and things for them to reach. So fun moment, but it reminded me of like Julius getting into the game late when they're blowing the team out to try to develop his acumen on the court. So, but it's fun to see him, show off the bounce a little bit, the put back dunk, the way the bench reacted, the whole nine. But I don't know. I appreciate Doc Rivers and all the praise that he heaped on him and talking about his defense and what he can be. But I'm like the state of Missouri. You got to show me, and I need to see it when it matters. Good for Jaden Springer. I hope he uses that as motivation, but
No, that's perfectly fair. I think definitely just like these are long, tiring seasons that can get boring for veteran guys. So you don't want to totally overlook these moments that are fun and are a little bit different and that you don't expect. I think they help you get through the season. And to that point, I think, okay, you can perhaps brush aside some of Rivers' praise and just chalk it up to him wanting to be nice to a young kid who tries hard. But I do think it's a valid point that practices are really not much fun in the NBA, and effort has to be extracted from some of these guys. And Springer at least goes hard and at least pushes them, when he gets those opportunities to practice. But yeah, nothing to read into to any great degree. And Jaden Springer, he's someone who remains a future-focused guy in the Sixers' eyes, it appears. If he was a Detroit Piston, he would be getting rotation minutes, but that's just not the situation at all in Philadelphia. So we'll see.
How do you think?
future holds. Yeah.
How do you think Furkan, Daniel House feel? Like mentally, you got to be like strong enough to withstand the fact that I've gone from maybe, being able to on a fringe of cracking the regular rotation to being on the court with Jaden Springer and Paul Reed and getting these DMP CDs. It's like got to be a little topsy turvy trying to navigate, the mental aspect of, being prepared to play and also trying to be, the best version of yourself. You know what I'm saying? Like you're trying to like push yourself. Like I'm sure, those guys think of themselves in a high regard and feel like they can contribute to an NBA team. But here you are just getting garbage time minutes where you may have been closer to the 6, 7, 8-man rotation.
Yeah, I do think it's helpful that both of those guys, it's not new territory. In fact, Furkan Korkmaz walked a similar path to Jaden Springer, where he was often up and down in Delaware. Daniel House also had a brief stay with the then Delaware 87ers and is a journeyman player, if we're being honest. He's gone a million places and had his most sustained success in Houston. But you look at last year, he was on 10-day contracts with multiple teams and having to prove himself whenever he did get opportunities. So I think if this was just foreign territory for these fringe rotation guys, that might be a little more troubling in terms of, are they keeping the right mindset? Are they staying ready? Do they have a good attitude? I think the Sixers with House, with Korkmaz, they're in a good place there. So that's at least, a positive to, look at and I guess take away. But yeah, definitely tough for these guys that there's been very sparse playing time here and actual meaningful minutes. But as the Sixers have seen, things change rapidly and injuries arise. And I don't think any of us would be surprised if 5 games from now, House is starting or Korkmaz is, hitting a huge shot late in the game. The Sixers want to have a deep roster for a reason. And last night, they got to use everyone who was healthy, which is certainly nice because they absolutely crushed an inferior opponent.
Here we are with the Sixers on the horizon of some more difficult games, but right now they're taking care of business and, just handling who's in front of them. And that's all we can ask for. A lot of people are interested in how things will play out over the course of the season, and we will get to that. But it's important for us to let you know, if you are injured for over 70 years, Lundy Law has been the #1 personal injury law firm in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. Their services are exemplary. Their results are exceptional. Call 1-800-LUNDY-LAW to get the money you deserve. Hey, opioid addiction is a national public health crisis. The Someone You Know podcast from the Independence Blue Cross Foundation offers inspiring stories that challenge stigma, offer hope, and humanizes the disease of addiction. Download the new season 3 of Someone You Know on all major podcast platforms. Noah, the NBA midseason survey has come out where the NBA polls, I think it is 30 beat writers around the league, and they vote on where they think the teams, rank. So the Sixers came in 8th out of all the NBA teams, behind the Pelicans, behind New Orleans, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, the Celtics, other teams you might imagine. And there's also the, NBA MVP ladder, as well as the best international player, which doesn't, really make me feel any type of way. But what were your thoughts on seeing the Sixers 8th out of the teams in the NBA?
Yeah, it doesn't look outrageous to me here. To your point about the Nets, the Nets are 4th here. So I think many.
Does that surprise you?
Yeah, I would have thought it might be slightly lower, but I guess just the ceiling is quite obviously high when they're all healthy and they're all clicking. So perhaps many people feel that's what's most important, in the context of a playoff series. But yeah, Boston and Milwaukee, to what we were discussing earlier, still at the top of this list. Is interesting to see the Cleveland Cavaliers right above the Sixers.
It feels like some of those things fell based on just sheer record. Like the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, the Pelicans are there at the top of the Western Conference, and they're above the Sixers, who have less wins than them. So some of those things kind of feel like it fell that way. But
yeah, right. Yeah, it's hard to, I think, argue
because the Pelicans don't have Brandon Ingram. KD's out 2 weeks. So, like, does that play into those decisions about how they're ranked, or did they just project about how they think they'll finish the season? Like, that's probably a question I would have.
Right, and probably everyone sort of has their own
reasoning.
Value those different factors. But I think clearly the Sixers have said in past years that they're built for the playoffs. And for every team, that's always the goal, that they have the flexibility and the star power and the depth to thrive in playoff series. Sixers also think they've added the toughness that'll make them more likely to do so. Yeah, to me, eighth doesn't seem horribly wrong to me. I think you could quibble with a team or two, but I think as the opinion in a wide sense, the Sixers have yet to show that they are a true top-tier contender, though I think most folks would agree that potential is there if Joel Embiid and James Harden are healthy, and if the complementary pieces are playing really well and stepping up in ways that they have not previously in second-round playoff series.
Yeah, it's going to be a gauntlet for them in the postseason for sure. We have talked about this a lot, about playoff matchups, which seem a little premature. We haven't even reached the All-Star break yet, but it's just something you continue to think about because the Sixers have continuously almost, but not quite, gotten over the hump past that second round ceiling that they've been facing. Moving on to the MVP stuff, I just feel like the MVP thing for Joel Embiid is just something he's going to have to forget about, and will come back to him at the proper time. It seems like that's the mentality he's taken, where he hasn't, spouted platitudes about the Defensive Player of the Year or, the MVP award or, any of those things as he has in years past. And it also is going to be a direct result of winning. Like, if the team is doing really well, will beget, him winning the MVP award. But I think it is a little weird for him to have been so close the past couple of years, not really doing much different in his game. He's leading the league in scoring. He's, right there rebounding wise with his regular averages, and the team is performing, maybe a little underachieving a bit from where people expected, but it is kind of weird that he's not as close as he was in previous seasons, and he's not doing much different. Do you feel that same way, or am I looking at it wrong?
I mean, if he ends up finishing like 9th or 10th in the MVP voting, then I'd agree that that's odd, because this is a player whose game has not dropped off in a way that would merit that. I just think there are always major ups and downs with how people view the race, and clearly there have been little shifts in how people see things just based on, Luka had a wild 60-point game, or Donovan Mitchell scored 71 points or what have you. So I just don't put a ton of stock into the mid-season stuff. But I do agree it's unfortunate, and just kind of stinks for Joel Embiid that he set such a high bar for himself that you wonder, what would be necessary to be seen as superior to Jokic. But honestly, like, the main reason that's the case is Jokic is incredibly good, and there are a lot of other great players in this league who do deserve MVP consideration. That's just not a knock on Embiid. It's just the state of the league where there are so many guys who are in their prime and putting up these ridiculous numbers. And Embiid also, I think if you're looking at like what's most harsh or most unfair about how he's perceived relative to MVP voting, it's the missed games. Like, I think any time he misses time with injury, it just gets blown up and serves to reinforce the perception people already have that he's incredibly injury prone and that he'll never play enough to whatever, be a star on a championship team or to deserve MVP or all of that. It seems like Embiid missing 3 games with left foot soreness in the national, media's eyes or whatever you want to say is equivalent to another star, missing 6 or 7 games. It just gets blown up probably more than it should. But also, he has missed 3 games with this injury, 4 games earlier with the left midfoot sprain, which he says this, feels similar to. And he's not been available for close to every game. And when you're having to make tough choices, I think choices become easier, when one of the stars has played a lower percentage of games. So he's definitely looking at an uphill battle if he wants to, somehow come back and win this MVP award, if that's how you see it, if you see him as being really behind right now. And that's just the reality. And I think he totally gets what you're saying, that when games, all of the controversy and all of the feeling like you've been disrespected, that stuff tends to disappear.
A Philly sports star being misunderstood by the national media? What? That's never happened. But it's funny, Joel Embiid is playing at his same clip. But I guess, to your point, you got to give credit to guys like Nikola Jokic, who has maintained this incredible level of play that is pleasing to the eyes and, does so much for his team. So maybe, like you said, we need to be giving more credit to Nikola Jokic for being as consistent and as great in everyone's eyes, getting the larger swath of approval from other beat writers around the league. I maybe it's a little bit of like numbness from him, being near the top. But when you look at how he's playing and the numbers he's putting up, it maybe just isn't. Like, he's just an incredible player, and just like, Bill Russell or, who else you want to think of, Connie Hawkins, they just kind of played at the wrong time where other great players like Kareem and Wilt were around that took away the spotlight from how great they were, So maybe that's the situation Embiid's in, but at the same time, I think he would take the championship over all of those individual awards, and that's where the Sixers need to be focused.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're, really determined to start mounting an early Embiid deserves, more MVP votes than Jokic sort of case, Denver's a bottom 10 defense this season, and obviously Embiid's been a big part in the Sixers making real defensive improvements. And I think showing the potential at least to finish this year as a top 3 or top 5 defense. So he's absolutely superior on that end of the floor, but Jokic is an historically great offensive player, and he's not the only one in the NBA, of course. Like, Luka has just done some wild stuff statistically on a very, very consistent basis. Jason Tatum, of course, is also great. We could go down the list, and I think draw many names that Joel Embiid is not head and shoulders above, just in terms of the overall quality of player. But nevertheless, he's great, and the Sixers are much better than when he's on the floor, and they're glad that he's back. It'll definitely be worth monitoring his health here moving forward, because he said last night he's not 100%, and this left foot issue does feel similar to the injury he had earlier that was diagnosed as a midfoot sprain, but evidently he was cleared to play, and he's good enough to score 36 points in 24 minutes. But would sure be nice for the Sixers if they could feel in a little more stable place with his health, and we're sure that he'd be available and 100% every night. That's just not where we are.
Hopefully he does feel as close to 100% as he can be on Thursday, because I'm sure the fans in South Philly would love to be treated to this NBA scoring showdown between him and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, both pouring it in this season as the Oklahoma City Thunder come to town. Do you think that might be a tighter game, a little payback for the Thunder coming to South Philly, looking to, avenge their loss the Sixers gave them in OKC earlier this year? Do you feel like that might be a tighter contest, particularly than the one we saw with Detroit over these past 2 games?
Right. I mean, I think it's close to impossible not to be tighter than last night's game. I mean, I still would not be surprised at all if the Sixers win it comfortably. I do think they're clearly a better team. And, of course, they beat OKC rather easily on the road on New Year's Eve. But, yeah, I think for the fans' sake, it might be nice to have a game that, was actually a little bit competitive in the fourth quarter. I think that's certainly possible if SGA gets hot and Josh Giddey and the other young
all those guys
do their thing. But and Giddey's been playing well and is a super talented passer and a guy that is really entertaining to watch. But the Sixers are still a lot better, I think, and should win that game and should move to 26-15 if they do so, and that'll be exactly the halfway point. And then it's time to hit the road, head to the West Coast.
What's popping on the website for you? I know you have a piece up on Jaden Springer. What's your angle on that?
Yeah, just covering much of what we touched on here, the roller coaster, I think, of his season, and just how he has tried to approach that, tried to make the best of the opportunities. And then also, some of the quotes from folks last night, not just Doc Rivers, Joel Embiid and James Harden also weighing in on what they've seen from Springer behind the scenes. And then also we'll be writing a bit about Nerlens Noel, who, matched up with an old friend at Embiid, reflected on his time in Philly, said that he thinks Sam Hinkie deserves more credit, which was a fun comment by him, I think, in retrospect. So that's what we've got going on. And then back at it game coverage-wise with the Sixers-OKC matchup.
What was the reaction in the arena last night when Nerlens shoots that 3?
I think everyone was very stunned. Yeah, including Joel Embiid. I mean, this was the 3rd 3 of his career. He's not played a short career.
Right.
And it snapped, I think, like a 15-0 Sixers run. And if you were to choose any way that, the run would end, that would not even be on the list. But you noticed Embiid had a little wry smile as he was jogging back down the court. And then the very next possession, pump fake, couple of dribbles, slams it home, and the game feels a little more normal again than the strangeness of Nerlens Noel shooting it from deep.
Sixers lottery pick, Nerlens Noel, still hanging around in the league. What did he turn down? Was it 4 years, $70 million or something like that for the Mavericks? Trying to bet on himself. Do you remember that?
I think reportedly, I think those numbers sound about right to me. He's definitely had some ups and downs, but did say last night, like, he's proud that he's still at it and has forged a long career for himself when many guys are unable to do so in the NBA. This was actually his first start of the season, and he's not playing much at all in Detroit, but it was such an emergency situation with Isaiah Stewart scratch late that that was a fun little angle last night that we got, Noel versus Embiid.
More angles in the protractor on the Sixers Talk podcast. We appreciate you listening. For Noah Levick, I'm Danny Pommells. We're brought to you by Wilmington University. Ben Berry, our producer, always making it happen. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We will see you next time on the Sixers Talk podcast.